You guys give me the thumbs up. How's everyone doing this morning? Great. Good. Outstanding. My name's Dustin, and I'm here from the 0-Day Initiative. Thanks for stopping by. I want to talk about bug bounty programs. I've been in the industry for a while. I was trained initially by the Air Force to catch hackers. This was back in 1997 is when I joined the Air Force Computer Emergency Response Team. A lot of people don't remember that we still had computers back in the mid-90s, but it's true. I lived through the pop-ups. I lived through the first browser wars. Just like so many bits, they kind of all scatter around. From there, I led a team testing intrusion detection systems. That's really my background is IDS and catching bad guys. I remember when Snort didn't have full packet capture, so things like that make it a lot of fun. From there, I went to Microsoft. I worked for the Microsoft Security Response Center. I patched Windows and primarily .NET, which means I patched a lot of things. Has anyone ever heard of MS 08067, better known as Conficker? That was my bulletin. Stuxnet, some of this here. Actually, I'll show you Stuxnet later too. And then I came to the 0-Day Initiative by way of HPE, formerly of HP. Is anyone from HP here? Good, don't. It's really bad there. I cannot recommend against it enough. So bug bounties existed for a long time, and I've dealt with them in many different forms, both on the receiving end and on the purchasing side. And the thing that always amazes me is most people don't understand how bug bounties impact them. And you can say, well, they don't impact me. I don't find bugs. I'm a pen tester. I'm a threat intel person. Bug bounties are worthless to me. Actually, bug bounties impact you a lot in different ways, and that's kind of what I want to go over and show you how we got here and kind of where bug bounties are headed as well, because the impact they have across the industry really is broad. And also, since we're just here and it's just us, if you have a question, just let me know, please. So we kind of have to start with the nature of disclosure, because to understand bug bounty programs, you kind of have to start with vulnerability disclosure. That is primarily what a bug bounty program does, is vulnerability disclosure. And we're going to talk about a lot about economics as well, because all of these things have value. And I know we are at a religious university, but I do not want a religious debate. So when I talk about disclosure here, it can get religious. I just want us to have some common terms. So the first type of disclosure is full disclosure. And that's when someone releases all the details of a bug, either before a patch is available or sometimes after a patch is available. People don't think about full disclosure after a patch is available, but it's very common. We have Patch Tuesday and we have Exploit Wednesday. And one of the things that people say against full disclosure is, how can you have full disclosure? Why are you publishing all this information now? Because the patch has only been available for a day. Who here runs any sort of patch management where they get their entire enterprise patched in a day? I don't know of anyone who does. I know the best on the planet get it done in about 30 days. So that Patch Tuesday, Exploit Wednesday thing really matters to them. And then there was this term that came out called responsible disclosure. And this is where you coordinate as a researcher with the affected vendor so that no details are released prior to a security patch or other sort of mitigation is available. Some people really like this, mainly the vendors, because it gives them the term responsible. So when someone doesn't conform with this, they can use the term irresponsible, which if you're a security researcher, is kind of a negative connotation, because they say, well, you were irresponsible in shipping out the bad code to start with. So don't call me irresponsible, who are you? So that's where it gets religious, I don't like it. Then we came up with this term called coordinated disclosure. It's like responsible disclosure, except without the moral high ground and all the hoot and falutin stuff. So we take out the moral judgment. We want to coordinate response between the security researcher and the vendor, the affected vendor, and then everything is happy, but things can still go wrong in that. So coordinated. I also don't have it on the slide, but public and private disclosure are really a thing too, and those are very straightforward. Either it's public or it's private. The other type of disclosure that most people normally don't talk about is non-disclosure. Bugs exist. There are, we have, from the ZDI, reported about 3,000 bugs in the last couple years. That's only a fraction of the bugs that are out there. There are bugs that are out there that are true vulnerabilities, and they are used in active attacks. And they're usually used in active attacks by people with logos like this. The one in the middle is what I came up with for Fancy Bear. I didn't invent it. It was on a Google image search. That's the Russian APT team. There's also North Koreans who use non-disclosed vulnerabilities, lots of Chinese. In other words, with non-disclosure, we get Stuxnet. So disclosure policy started to exist, and the first one came about in the late 90s, and it's still astonishing to me that if you Google for vulnerability disclosure policy, one of your top hits is going to be from someone who goes by the sobriquet of Rainforest Puppy. I actually met him once. He's a nice guy. He has a real job now, so he's not doing this anymore. But in the late 90s, Rainforest Puppy was finding bugs in Microsoft IIS server, a lot of them. And he was disclosing the bugs, sometimes very publicly, sometimes out of frustration. He and Microsoft were going back and forth a lot. I was not at Microsoft at this time. I was still at the Air Force at this time. So he wrote Rainforest Policy and said, this is how I'm going to disclose bugs. I'm going to send you an email, and if you send me back a response within 5 days, I'll work with you. We'll keep it private. If you don't send me a response in 5 business days, I'm going to go public. And from that Rainforest Policy, which is still available online, he set timelines for vendors' response. This was the first time where it says you have to respond within 5 days. You have essentially 6 months. I think the initial one was to get it fixed. It was considered revolutionary at the time. And from what I've heard from the roommates is that Microsoft did have some input. What's currently online is RFPolicy 2.0. So that really helped change things. There's now an ISO for this, ISO 29147. And it's one of the few ISOs that are actually free. They don't charge you for it because they want people to have a good vulnerability disclosure policy. Because without a vulnerability disclosure policy, you end up with corporations threatening litigation against security researchers who believe they're doing the right thing. Even to the point, and this was very common in the early 2000s, but even recently, Dan Gooden, who's a reporter for Ars Technica, published information about a vulnerability disclosure in a product. However, the vendor thought he got it wrong to the point where they sued him. And eventually the case was dropped, but it was kind of frightening because not only are the researchers threatened with a legal response, the reporters reporting on the researchers are threatened by a legal response. Having a good vulnerability disclosure policy makes it easier because then people are willing to work with you. If they're willing to work with you on coordinated disclosure, you end up in that non-disclosure situation a lot less often. So again, let's go back in time. We'll move forward a little bit from the late 90s into the early 2000s. 2001 was a bad year for Microsoft and for IIS admins and for SQL admins. There was these things called NIMDA, Co-Red, Melissa, and Slammer. It was fun. It was the Wild West days, and everyone was doing response, and it was crazy. It was very, very bad for them. And then in 2002, Bill Gates released the Trustworthy Computing Memo. And it said, you know what? We're going to take security seriously as a corporation. And that was really interesting. And the result of that directly was Patch Tuesday. If you go back into the late 90s and you look at security advisories, because Microsoft didn't do security bulletins back then, they only had security advisories, they were typically released on Friday afternoon. I now work in communications. Friday afternoon is where news goes to die, okay? You release something on Friday afternoon because you don't want people talking about it. However, as an Air Force incident responder at the time, I hated it because now I had to answer questions to the colonel and like everything's going on and what's this mean and how are we affected? And it's Friday afternoon. I just want to go home and have a beer like everybody else. So it established a regular cadence. Microsoft was taking a lot of heat for pulling that crap. It also established the Microsoft Security Response Center. It established the Secure Development Lifecycle, which is the Microsoft way of building better code. The Secure Windows Initiative, SWI, also came out of that. So the other big thing is it resulted in Microsoft actually publicly stating, we will not litigate researchers who attempt to work with us. That was huge. As Microsoft goes, often the industry goes. So them leading the way in this was actually a really big deal. And I say that as someone who no longer works there. So when done properly, disclosure drives action. And this is one thing that I cannot stress enough. Disclosure drives action, and disclosure happens all the time. Patch Tuesday is a disclosure. This past Tuesday, Microsoft disclosed 67 CVEs. And the action is apply the security patch. That's beautiful, great. That's a wonderful thing I can do. Or change a configuration, or add this ACL, or remove QuickTime for Windows. One of the big things that ZDI did was we were reporting bugs in Apple QuickTime for Windows. And it just got to the point where Apple said, we can't fix this. We are end of life in QuickTime for Windows right now. Okay, well that disclosure drives the action of please uninstall QuickTime for Windows. Not exactly what we had in mind, but when it's done incorrectly, there's bad press, there's contempt, there's, your side versus our side. Everyone has a side, and if you're not on my side, you're on the wrong side. And I used to work for the MSRC. After one of these bad disclosures, there was a group called the Microsoft Spurned Researcher Collective, the MSRC. I thought that was really cute. They just dropped a null deref, though. It wasn't even anything big. Religious debates, retaliation. I have been physically threatened by researchers. Just because you're a good researcher doesn't mean you're actually mentally hinged, I suppose. So it can be really interesting when done incorrectly. But even if you go full disclosure, good things can happen from it. For example, last year we reported some bugs in Foxit Reader. Everyone knows Foxit Reader, alternative to Adobe for reading PDFs, hopefully. They came back with won't fix. Essentially, the bugs would not hit if safe reading mode was on. And they said, you know what, that's good enough for us. And we said, we disagree, we're going to go public with it. And they said, have at it. So we did. We went public with it. And interestingly enough, we got an email very shortly thereafter from someone different in the company saying, could you please publish this and we'll get that fixed right away. So Foxit said, we're deeply committed to providing a secure PDF viewer. There was a miscommunication. We're going to fix those bugs. And 1 week later, there were patches for the 2 bugs that they said we weren't going to fix. That's great. That's the sort of disclosure driving action that I want to see. Either CVEs get released and we apply patches, or vendors go, you know what, we are reconsidering. I put this up here not to shame Foxit, but actually to applaud them, because the right people in Foxit got notified, and then they said, oh, well, maybe let's change our mind on this. Clearly, it wasn't a technical issue because it came out, within a week. So clearly it was we didn't want to do this issue. We didn't think it was relevant issue. And those are the ones I kind of want to avoid. Any questions up to this point? Because that's disclosure. People usually get mad. Yes? Is Linux/Mac better than Windows? The answer is, of course, everything's better than anything. So the one thing I've learned in counting vulnerabilities over the years is however you're counting vulnerabilities, you're doing it wrong. And I've counted a lot of vulnerabilities, and I've done it wrong. Just ask Steve Christie from MITRE. Linux and Mac and Windows all have security issues. Right now, we can say, well, Linux has fewer reported security issues. Do they have less overall? I don't know. One of the things that bounty programs can do, and I'll show here in a little bit, thank you for setting that up, and I'll have that coin for you later, is we can encourage research into certain areas. And this is one area where people don't realize bounty programs do this, and we do this intentionally at times. Let's say I wanted to find some Linux bugs. I currently am a part of the world's largest vendor-agnostic bug bounty program. If I tell this room, hey, starting next week, remote code execution bugs in the Linux kernel, $125,000 cash. There's probably going to be a few people in this room who are going to start researching Linux kernel bugs for $125K. And I'll tell you right now, that's on the low end for gray black market sales. So if I want Linux kernel bugs, I can announce that. There aren't a lot of Linux bug bounty programs right now because part of the problem with Linux is who do we report it to? There are some places where we can report some bugs to. If it's a Red Hat specific bug or an Ubuntu bug, well, we know where to go. With Apple, we find a lot of Apple bugs, especially in Mac OS and kernel escapes. So is one better than the other? They're tools. A hammer is no better than a screwdriver, is no better than a wrench. They're more prolific bugs in Windows right now. So there's more research being done in Windows, if nothing else, just because of Well, it has more space. You know, it has more market share. But interesting question. Anything else? Did I manage to get through that without making anyone angry? Damn, man, I thought I was better than that. So let's talk about bug bounties through the years. Here's a quick question. What year was the term bug bounty created? Anyone want to guess? 2007. Good guess. Wrong. 1995. I know. When I started researching like the very beginnings of bug bounty programs, a Netscape engineer in 1995 came up with the term bug bounty. So he's Jarrett Ridlinghofer, and I'm probably murdering his name, came up with that. It is recognized as the first bug bounty program and seen as incredibly controversial. And I'm going to tell you the incredibly lame analogy that was used back then to describe bug bounty programs. Let's say you own a house with a porch, and someone comes along and paints your porch and then knocks on your door and said, I just painted your porch, pay me. That was the analogy that people were using, which is ridiculous because, well, there were people going around doing that, just reporting bugs and then asking for cash. The bug bounty programs themselves are saying, here's the ways you can get rewarded. In some cases, we'll see the rewards are not monetary necessarily, but now it's a good way to get some cash. It's a good way to get some bugs too. Microsoft at one time said it would never have a bug bounty program. They were very public on this. They do now have a bug bounty program. One thing I want to stress though is bug bounty programs don't solve everything. They are much cheaper than replying to Stuxnet, but they're much more expensive than not shipping bugs. Not shipping bugs is still the cheapest form. So if you're a developer, spending a little extra money on that QA is still the cheapest form of response. There are a few different types of bug bounty programs too. The first one I'm going to talk about is vendor agnostic because that's where I come from since I work at ZDI. Formerly VeriSign, Accenture, iDefense is the other big one. They are typically a little bit more focused on threat intelligence than actually vulnerability acquisition. They've been around since 2002. ZDI's been around since 2005. We do claim to be the largest vendor agnostic bug bounty program. Frost & Sullivan does a study every year saying where most of the bugs come from, and we end up at the top. So how do vendor agnostic bug bounty programs work? And both of them work in this way. Because when I go talk to customers, they're like, how can you afford to spend all this money buying bugs? Because we don't sell the bugs. We don't sell them to vendors. We report them to vendors and get them fixed. So what we do is when we get a vulnerability submitted, for example, we had one submitted last week in Adobe Reader. What we do is we take it and we hand it off to our teams and we create a signature. So we also, Trend Micro has a tipping point intrusion prevention system. Those customers get pushed a signature. They don't know what the signature's for. It just says ZDI signature number 12345. Our customers are then protected from that Oday. Now it's an Oday vulnerability and not an Oday exploit. There is a difference. Oday vulnerabilities exist all the time. Oday exploits are actually relatively rare. However, for that time, our customers are now protected. We report it to the vendor. We report it to Adobe. They're going to fix it. The patch will eventually be released. Everything goes out. We rename the signature to what it actually is, put the CVE on it, blah, 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 blah. And everyone's happy. That's the vendor agnostic bug bounty way. So when you talk about how in the world we can afford to spend, like in 2017, we spent $1.3 million just on buying bugs from Pwn to Own, which is our annual hacking competition. We spent $235-ish thousand on bugs this year at the spring Pwn to Own, which was really interesting because one of the kids, and I don't mean that in an offensive way, he's 20 years old, and I'm more than that. So I call him a kid. He's a university student, and I'm like, dude, well, how do you have time to do this? He's like, well, you know, I got to finish my last 2 years of school, so I really kind of needed the money. And he walked away with $125,000 in cash that will go to Carnegie Mellon to help finish his degree in computer science. And then hopefully he'll move to Austin and join the rest of our team. So that's the way vendor agnostic bug bounties work. And in the meantime, we got some amazing bugs in the Windows kernel and in the Mac kernel and the Edge and Safari browser from him. So some really, really good work. Vendor-specific programs are much more obvious. If I'm Mozilla, which they started theirs in 2004, I'm going to give you cash, you give me bugs. Pretty simple. Why do they do this? Because it's cheaper to acquire bugs this way than to go through the public disclosure route than to go through all these other routes. You'll notice up here that Microsoft has an Apple. Well, Apple is an invite only, so it's weird. It's kind of a bug bounty, but not really a bug bounty. It's not a bug bounty for you. It's a bug bounty for very specific people. So that's kind of weird. In 2015, we saw something weird. United came up with their bug bounty. They gave you frequent flyer miles if you submit bugs. And I think somebody actually got like 1 million frequent flyer miles. So it's pretty cool. Facebook has theirs, but if you look at Microsoft or like Apple, why would you report to them versus a vendor agnostic one? Well, what we do, and this is just a difference. You can debate whether or not it's better. When we report to the vendor, we have an upcoming page on our website. And we say, hey, we reported something to the vendor today. There's no information about it other than a CVSS score. So it's like we reported a CVSS 10 to Microsoft today, or to Apple, or to Adobe, or to whomever. And now they're on the clock. Because after 120 days, we disclose. So it's one way to make sure that the vendor is held accountable. Different vendors do better than other vendors. Microsoft is a pretty mature process for their response center. They've been doing it for a long time. But if you try to deal with Foxit on your own, that can get a little problematic. There's also this thing now called the Wassenaar arrangement. Anyone heard of the Wassenaar arrangement? Yes, it's very difficult now because what the Wassenaar arrangement is countries have banded together to say that certain types of information security research is now classified as a cyber weapon. So I've actually received, done paperwork that I have received a cyber weapon, which I just want to remind you, you can't hug kids with cyber arms. I'm not a cyber arms dealer. So if you're reporting directly to the vendor, you might be on the hook for handling that paperwork. If you're not, we can handle that for you. Question?
Just personally, I'm not a bug bounty hunter
Uh-huh.
at all, but I personally think that it would be safer if you're an independent researcher to go through an intermediary of some type, such as CDI or something, because if you're dealing directly with a vendor and they get all nasty when you reported a bug, then, okay, they're going to whip out their lawyers and it's this mammoth corporation versus you, and I personally wouldn't want the aggravation. I'd rather go through somebody like that, so at least I've got some tracking if I need it.
Thank you very much. I totally agree with you. I mean, and again, like I said, this is not to knock Microsoft because I think they generally have a good, generally these days. They're a lot worse without me there, trust me. But yeah, it is a lot harder to go directly to the vendor. They have their lawyers. Guess what? I've got mine too. So it does make it a little bit easier. There are a couple other options though, which is interesting, and this one is a very recent one, where I call it bug bounty as a service. This is HackerOne and BugCrowd, sort of Synac, but not quite really. And these are for companies that maybe they're not an IT company, but they want to have some sort of bug bounty program. So these companies run a bug bounty program for third parties. For example, Starbucks has a bug bounty program that's administered by BugCrowd, I think. I can't remember which one is which on who does it. But if you're either a small company or you've got like that online web presence and you want to make sure, so that Starbucks is kicking in money to them. They are administering the bug bounty program. I have not, despite my caffeinated state, actually submitted bugs to Starbucks before, so I don't know what you get if it's paid in coffee grounds or whatever. But that's interesting to me that there's an acknowledgement that bug bounties are a thing, but also one of, like LastPass, I think, uses HackerOne. LastPass is that password manager. I use it. I know a lot of folks use it. LastPass doesn't have a whole heaping staff to run a bug bounty program. But they still acknowledge, hey, this could be a thing for us. Let's contract HackerOne or BugCrowd. I always get them mixed up. And that's kind of where it goes. So those are different types of bug bounty programs. Let's show some slides with animations on it. So the interesting thing about the exploit marketplace is I'm paying for, well, not me personally, companies paying for bugs. Microsoft's paying for bugs, Apple's paying for bugs, HackerOne's paying for bugs. But we're not the only ones out there. We're just the white market. There's also the gray market and the black market. So if you're a security researcher and you want to get paid, you have options. And I was going to take this slide out because it's actually out of date. But if nothing else, I wanted to, because it's only like a year old, and it's woefully out of date now. This is the marketplace. So on this side, we've got security vendors. These are white hats. It gets progressively gray as we go this way. Also, Accuvant is no longer doing this. They were bought by someone who was bought by someone who spun out, and I can't tell the players without a card. The Vulnerabilities Brokerage International, they're gone now too. Used to be Vupin, now it's Zerodium. So there's a lot of shifting things in the marketplace. The marketplace is an economic marketplace, so it has factors that weigh into it. But it's pretty interesting. So there's a lot of competition out here of people who are willing to purchase security research. And essentially, here's how it works. You have the researchers out there, and they're finding bugs. Hopefully, they're going to work with us or another white hat vulnerability team. They're going to sell their report from anywhere from a few $100s to thousands of dollars. We're going to take it, write signatures, and then report it to the vendor. Or maybe they don't. Maybe they want to go black market, which is up top. They're going to sell directly to that exploit writer. Or they're going to sell to the government, where they're forced to sell to their government. Or they're forced to sell to a vulnerability broker. The prices here are higher, a lot. Especially when you deal with that middle one, which is an agency that can quite literally print money. It's really hard to outbid a government. Now, one of the interesting things that it becomes a moral dilemma for a lot of people is, once you sell a vulnerability to these people, how is it used? We're very upfront. The bug bounty programs are very upfront. We're going to report it to the vendor. We're going to try and get a security patch made available. The vulnerability, well, selling it to the government, obviously you don't know. It's going to go black bag at that point. Selling it to a vulnerability broker, also, well, what are they going to use it for? Some of the vulnerability brokers say, we only resell to NATO countries. Well, NATO countries include Turkey, which has been accused of using vulnerabilities to spy on their own people. You okay with that? You okay with that for $1 million? I know a lot of people are going to say, yeah. And I'm not here to judge. I'm just saying some people, maybe not. The other interesting thing about this is once you sell to one of these parties, it's no longer your research. So selling to us, or selling to iDefense, or selling to Microsoft, we put your name on it. It's still your research. You can go out and talk about it later. You sell to these people, it's gone. You just burned your bug. You'll never see it again. You don't get to go to DEF CON and talk about it. You don't get to show up at BSides Nashville and tell everyone about the research you did. So that's another thing. In a way, it's a quick payoff versus a long-term investment.
But you're out of steal Monday.
I'm sorry?
But you're out of steal Monday.
Yeah. Or you're just going to go black market. You're going to sell it to an exploit writer. This is not as financially beneficial as it used to be. Wrong way. Because he's got to resell it too. He's going to sell that vulnerability to a botnet creator who's going to create a botnet and then rent it out to a botnet herder. And all these people have got to get paid, okay? So they're going to get paid by spammers who are going to rent that botnet, by DDoS extortioners, by credential harvesters, okay? The credential harvester is going to get paid because he's going to sell a credential to a smart guy who's going to buy one big purchase and then cash out. And then he's going to resell the credential to a dumb person who's going to buy beer and chips. This is the exploit economy in action. This is completely legal. And there's an asterisk there because I go back to that whole Wassenaar arrangement. One of the reasons that you don't find a lot of security researchers living in France right now is because the French government has kind of said, you have to tell us as you tell other people, so they don't want to do that. So there are legalities around it. There's extra paperwork. However, generally speaking, this is completely legal. Generally speaking, this is mostly legal. A lot of exploit vulnerability brokers are located in Austin, Texas. I live in Murfreesboro, by the way. I'm local, work remote, but most of our team is in Austin. And we talk to them, and they're not bad people. They're just buying bugs, same as us. So yeah, it's totally legal in a lot of places, again, depending on your country, your nationality, blah, 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 to sell this way. This is definitely not legal. And there's an asterisk here too, because there are some countries, especially in Eastern Europe, where they do not have laws that cover any type of cyber crime. And don't even get me started on China, where it's completely different sort of thing. You won't be prosecuted for this in North Korea. Because if you're doing this in North Korea, you're probably doing it on behest of the government. So they do a lot of DDoS extortion and sort of stuff that comes out of there. It's pretty interesting. This guy generally gets caught. Okay? This person who just spent $400 on camping gear at Walmart to try and return it at the next Walmart up the road to get the gift card or whatever, they almost universally get caught. Spammers sometimes get caught because, let's face it, everyone hates spammers. Nobody likes us. So even like the bot herders are like, yeah, whatever. The person who makes the big purchase with stolen credentials sometimes gets caught. But what's interesting is these folks rarely get caught. And if they are, it's very big news. But the people who are writing the botnet creators, Microsoft had, I think they still have a $500,000 reward for whoever was behind Configure. There was a whole Configure cabal of groups that came together to try and find out who wrote Configure. We don't know, for sure. So going back to the gray market team, in a couple of years ago, there was a leak from an Italian corporation, a gray marketplace called Hacking Team. And there was a bunch of stuff put out on WikiLeaks. Everyone was digging through for Odays, because there were Odays that were released in it. We were digging through for pricing, because we wanted to see how the pricing worked for them. And because if you're a gray market and you're selling vulnerabilities, where are you getting them? And how much are you paying for them? And in this case, the remote attack vector with a 12-month license was running at the grand total of 87,000 euro. What's interesting is if you dig through, different countries were paying different rates. For whatever reason, Kazakhstan got screwed. They were paying a lot more than like Bulgaria was. I don't understand it, but whatever. And it was a really interesting and eye-opening thing for us. So this is a little bit hard to see, but it shows growth, 2014, 2015, 2016. It shows them adding full-time employees. We're going from 55 to 67 full-time employees from 2015 to 2016. So it's a lucrative business. And these are in the millions of euros, I believe. So there's a lot of money here from this one little Italian place. There's also this. So how do you get an Oday for these people? You flat out buy it. This is a check for Vitaly Toropov. I think I'm saying his name correctly. It's 39,000 euros. What's interesting is Vitaly has also reported to the ZDI in the past. Smart cat. His bugs come in and they always hit. He was giving us like some Windows bugs. We suspect that this is an iOS bug. We don't know because this is all we can see. But what's really interesting is Vitaly also has a very unique signature, like the way he goes about stuff. And we build signatures to detect essentially Vitaly. So we probably had a signature for whatever they just bought. And then when they, if you're a corporation and you're trying to get from a vulnerability broker, well, you go into and you're like, hey, look, we want a memory corruption bug, but there's 3 types of licenses: exclusive, non-exclusive, or monthly. So this is really interesting. The exclusive license is obviously much more, because let's say I'm Bob's house of attack widgets, and my big competitor is Jill's house of attack widgets. If I'm buying Oday from the hacking team, I want the exclusive purchase, which is going to cost me more to make sure that Jill also doesn't buy it. Or maybe I'm having I know this one is not a good one, so I'm going to go non-exclusive, which means that they can resell it, or I just want a month-to-month license. Because it turns out there's a second Tuesday in every month, and there's always patches coming out month after month after month. So there's different licenses that can go through with this. And here's one of these agreements, and if you look at it, $95,000 for an exclusive license here. I'm trying to remember which one this was. I think this one was an Adobe one. But they don't get a check for $95K right up front. 50% of the purchase price is within 30 days, and then 25% after another 30 days, and then another 25% after 60 days, because bugs patch out. If you start using bugs, people are going to detect them sooner or later. If you don't believe me, just ask the people behind Stuxnet. They did get attacked sooner or later. Question?
I'm curious, with that licensing agreement, you're the researcher
Mm-hmm.
behind the vulnerability. You sell it
Yep.
market, what's to keep you from selling it to a white market?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. So in case you didn't hear it, like if I'm a researcher and I sell to a hacking team, what's to keep me from reselling to ZDI or some other place? Really, word of mouth. A whole lot of nothing is in place. Now, we can tell a lot of times, and we'll get to a place where I'll show you a bug burn. I'll show you Stuxnet and how it was a bug burn. But we know when people are shopping around, and we know when people are double dipping. And once you get that reputation, you're pretty much on a blacklist for us to purchase from. What's in place to do it? Our professional experience, and our professional experience across the industry, not just like us. So there's really nothing in place, because that happens all the time when people are double dipping. And that's one of the risks as a vulnerability broker, is what's to prevent, because, okay, let's say you're Vitaly and you sold for $39,000 and now they're charging $95,000. People find bugs all the time. Bug collisions happen. What's to prevent a different researcher from reporting that bug to the vendor independently, for free even, and then boom, shut down. So there's a lot of risk involved in this.
I would think as a broker, you probably have a lot of, or you could have a lot of upset clients.
Yes. Oh, we have a lot of upset clients because of us too, which is really funny, and this is great. This is one of my favorite emails from the entire thing. This is hard to read out there. But you talk about upset clients of vulnerability brokers. I've mentioned Pwn to Own. Hopefully you guys know what Pwn to Own is. They sent out this email saying, hey, one of your Flash UAFs, use after freeze, was patched yesterday because it was in Pwn to Own. Check out this blog. I wrote that blog. That's why I was so happy to see it. Just like, yes, increase my page views. Good for you. And we shut you down. So it's like, sorry about that. Love Giancarlo. So that, yeah, it's a very risky business to be in. If nothing else, that's one of the reasons why it's so shifting. But for certain companies like Zerodium is very successful. They are on the record saying that they will pay like $1 million for jailbreaks. Now, where does the jailbreak go after that? The only answer I can give you is not to Apple. Sorry. So let's talk about how bug bounties impact your enterprise, whether you know it or not. The most obvious result is the security patches. For 2017, we had a total of, we published a couple late, 1,014 advisories published by the Zero Day Initiative. I tried to count how many CVEs were from Microsoft. They've changed their way they do stuff, and it drives me crazy, so I couldn't get a good count. There's a lot of security patches that come through bounty programs. That's the most obvious thing. But there are some other things. One of it is like reputations. You start participating in it. You want a job? Go in Pwn to Own. You're almost guaranteed a job. And we know this every year, even when we are the ones who fail to hire them. We employ people who used to report to us. It got to be cheaper in the long run to just pay them full-time than to pay them on a per-bug basis. For the most recent one is there was a kid out of South Korea who goes by the handle of Loki Heart. And he's a rarity. A lot of times if you're a researcher in Windows or Mac OS or iOS or whatever, dude could do it all. And he could do sandbox escapes pretty much on any kernel, and he could do a lot of different stuff. He was the single biggest individual winner in Pwn to Own history, over $250,000, I think, right in that for his 3 days there at the contest. He now works for Google and Project Zero. Ivan Frantek works for Google Project Zero. He was the second place winner of the Microsoft Blue Hat Award back in 2013. These people get paid. I mean, Charlie Miller was one of the first. He's quite famous. Dino Dizovi is the first winner of Pwn to Own. So it won't make your career, but it certainly helps further things along. However, the other thing it does that we kind of talked about before, bug bounties drive research. One of the things we do when we talk about what we're going to do in Pwn to Own each year is we say, what bugs do we want to see? A couple of years ago, we said, we want to see virtual machine bugs. Cloud computing is ubiquitous. A lot of it relies on virtual machines, VMware. 2016, we introduced a VMware category to Pwn to Own. No one showed up. We expected that. Because once we announce it, it usually takes about a year for the research to catch up. 2017, people showed up. And they had a VMware escape that from a virtual machine, you could open Edge, fully patched, on Windows 2010, fully patched, browse to a website, things happen, and then boom, you execute code on the hypervisor underneath. Want to see it? Seriously, you want to see it? Okay, so here it is. This is a virtual machine that is running the latest version of VMware at the time, VMware ESX. By the way, VMware tools not installed on this. I know what you're thinking. He does the grand illusion of browsing to a web page. I hate bugs where it's like stand on one leg, hop 3 times, freeze the GPU, and then no, that's browsing to a web page. This takes a long time too. There's a lot of heap spray that's happening. There's a lot of memory alignment that's happening. So it gets me a chance to talk about Pwnone and why we do things like this. We really wanted to see, as security researchers, we use VM all the time, right? Like, hey, let's get malware and just detonate it in this VM. Nothing will happen because it's isolated. We wanted to see how we could get out of that isolation. And escaping the isolation turns out to be not as terribly difficult as we thought it really would be, which is crazy, because that's really important for us, especially if you're someone like Amazon Web Services, because how much vetting does AWS do of new clients? Yeah, about that much. They're like, does the check clear? Okay, come on in. So let's say you're on the same physical hardware as somebody else, and they're going to run this. So this was a really interesting hack. What they did is they combined an Edge vulnerability to get out of Edge. They had a kernel escape, kernel sandbox escape to get out of the kernel. And then what's going to happen in the end is they actually exploited the video driver for VMware. And you'll see it happen here in another minute or so when the screen goes whoop, like that. And then afterwards, the calc will pop. And this is what we wanted to see. We didn't see any this year for a lot of different reasons. Well, this year was kind of weird for Pwnone, but we did see some more. We've seen a lot of Oracle VirtualBox bugs come in. Microsoft has their Hyper-V bounty that's pumped up to $250,000. So research is now happening in this area. Oop, there we go. See? Shook down like that. Boom. Popped calc on the underlying hypervisor after browsing to a website. I know. I did not like that either as a user. But the good news is we bought it. VMware patched it in a week. Yay! We're all safe from that. However, we're also now living in a shadow broker's reality. The Equation Group, 2016 WikiLeaks, showed a bunch of things. They're supposedly still leaking stuff. If nothing else, it shows you the ridiculous things that military name stuff. And I'm saying this as a former military person. Oh, we had Ewok Frenzy, we had Brutal Kangaroo, we had Dangerous Donkey, and only one of those is made up. So subsequent leaks exposed additional tools, and it was really interesting. We started digging through it because we're looking for Odays, we're looking for a bunch of other stuff too. And we came across a really interesting one in the first leak, and this was the Ewok Frenzy one. And it was a 2007 CVE, which was really curious because in 2006, we bought a bug in IBM Lotus Domino. It was Oday and that, and it was a CVSS of 10. It was unauthentication, and IBM patched it in 2007. And the NSA was using it in 2017, which is really interesting because it shows me that they were targeting somebody who's still running IBM Lotus in 2017, and that person has not patched IBM Lotus Domino in 10 years. So it's very interesting. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is that bug burn, and this is actually from 2015. We had somebody we'd never heard from before contact us. We love hearing from people who've never contacted us, but boy, did he have a whopper. Stuxnet was in 2010. I remember because I lost a lot of sleep. But one of the bugs involved in Stuxnet, and there were several Odays, Oday exploits, which do really exist. One of them was you plug in a USB drive, open that folder, boom, code execution. Want to see? It works just like this. Did you catch it? You want to see again? That's how fast it goes. Because if you just click on the folder, code execution occurs. Clicked on the folder, popped the calc. What this guy reported is he'd read a book from Kim Zetter, which is not a technical book, called Countdown to Zero Day. Kim Zetter's a Wired reporter. She wrote a book about Stuxnet, interviewed a lot of people, and it's okay read. but he's a computer science student in Germany, and he reported, it's like, hey, I can get around this 2010 fix with this 2015 0096 CVE. So we reported it to Microsoft, and we said, by the way, we've never heard from this guy before. It's really unusual to never hear from someone, and then all of a sudden they walk up with, by the way, here's Stuxnet 2.0. So yeah, we've heard from him once since. Was it a government bug burn? I have no idea. But you don't normally read a novel and find that sort of thing. So it's pretty cool. That was a deep one. So when everything came out for the WikiLeaks stuff, we found Easy Cheese and Brutal Kangaroo, which again, I love how the way military name stuff. Easy Cheese was using that exploit. And then they have all these documents about how after we patched it in 2015, working with Microsoft, that they had to change their operational status, and now they were using Brutal Kangaroo instead of Easy Cheese, and it was great. And what's weird is we had IPS detection hits in Europe, South Africa, and Singapore on that signature. So it's pretty cool. So that's one of those things where bounty programs can really disrupt advanced operations. You don't get much more advanced than those folks. And hopefully the sound works for this. Speaking of advanced, this is Dave Weston. He is an incredibly smart guy. He works at Microsoft. He's one of the people responsible for browser security. And this is obviously at Black Hat 2016.
What was our inspiration for this? So we had a lot of luck and got a lot of value off of the pwn-to-own competition. So every year, for those of you who don't know, there's sort of a grand championship of hacking, at least in the browser space, called pwn-to-own. And folks from around the world come and exploit browsers. And as I said, that's really a technical feat at this point because we've reduced the number of people who can actually bypass mitigations in modern platforms to a very small percentage. And so every year, we would kind of hang out and wait for these exploits to come in, and we'd tear them apart the second they came in, and we'd make all kinds of improvements. So this list here is just a few places where either we were inspired based on analysis of a pwn-to-own exploit, or we were further kind of evangelized, or we were able to work with management to say, see, what we were saying is true. We're seeing these kind of techniques used in the wild. And we were able to land a whole bunch of improvements.
I think it's awesome. And yeah, that's directly related to our program, but it's related to all bug bounty programs too. That one of the reasons that it's harder, if you look at Matt Miller, who also works at Microsoft, just tweeted out something that's a graph of like different types of RCEs from 2006 to 2017. And you'll notice that UAFs are like this in the graph until 2014, and then they're like this because they introduced protections, part of which came out of pwn-to-own, but a lot of which came through bounty programs. UAFs are much more difficult to find, especially in Internet Explorer.
What was our inspiration for this?
Sorry, didn't mean to play it again. Okay. So obviously to the researcher, bug bounty programs have a lot of benefits. We take the pressure off the researcher dealing with the vendor. Some vendors are easier to deal with than others. Microsoft has a great program. I know the folks at Apple very well. Their response program is really good. Adobe folks are awesome. The folks at Google are really good. Some of the other ones, maybe not so much. We do offer that legal framework, which is becoming more and more important. One of the things about bug bounty programs, you can be anonymous. I don't care. I just don't give me something really rude and obnoxious and obscene to put as your credit. You want to be credited as Dangerous Donkey? Fine. You want to be anonymous? Fine. I don't care. Just tell me the bank number you want it wired to. Because, oh yeah, you get paid. And never underestimate the power of dollar bill, y'all. That's what I say. Cash solves a lot of problems, believe me. So in conclusion, blockchain solves, oh, wait, no, that's a lie. Sorry, I was contractually obligated to say blockchain at least once in this presentation. Bug bounty programs do really impact everyone. And whether it's a vendor agnostic program like ours, or a vendor specific program like Microsoft's or Google's, or a bug bounty as a service program like HackerOne and BugCrowd. The work they do makes it safer for everyone. So it's really interesting. The exploit marketplace is crowded and ever shifting. There's a whole lot of money out there for zero-day bug reports. So whether there is a difference between a zero-day vulnerability and a zero-day exploit, obviously, and a zero-day attack. Zero-day attacks are quite rare. Zero-day vulnerabilities are not. And which ones become zero-day attacks? If I could answer that 100 times correctly, I would be incredibly wealthy. I'm not. I'm doing okay though. But it's one of those things where it's like, I'm not going to take the chances. As I mentioned, bug bounty programs are not a panacea. As a servicing organization, you always want to service the cheapest way possible. Yes, because again, cash solves a lot of problems. The lack of cash, more problems. The cheapest way to service your stuff is to fix it before you ship it. It's always more expensive to fix it after you ship it. And then after you ship it, it's just how expensive does it get from there. I can't talk, obviously, about specific vendors or anything else, but I can tell you that when it comes to producing security patches, some vendors tell me that it's in excess of $1 million per security patch. I do not pay $1 million for bugs. I wish I could, because I'd get better bugs that way. So bug bounties are not a panacea. If you are an organization looking to do a bug bounty program, fantastic. We can help some with that too. Just send us a question or whatever. We'll tell you what we know. But don't think that it's going to, we can just remove all our QA now because we have a bug bounty program. Doesn't work like that. Because you will go broke on bug bounty programs. There's a limit of how many bugs you can buy. I still have a budget. They still say you cannot spend more than this. I would love to. There's certain bugs we turn away. We have a joke within ourselves that we are not a public drinking fountain, which means that, because people will come up to us all the time. It's like, hey, here's a bug in bobshouseofpancakes.com. Great, talk to them. I don't really care. That doesn't impact my customers. That doesn't impact the enterprise wide, or we don't buy every bug that we see. So they are not a panacea. It's always better. I'm on Twitter, like everyone else. Also at the ZDI, our social media guy really wanted me to plug that. I happen to be our social media guy. We're on the web, zerodayinitiative.com, also zerodayinitiative.com/blog. I like to write. I do a patch blog every month. I'm very unhappy with the state of Microsoft patches. I do a table that tries to make sense of them. Also, if you would like to report a bug, zdi@trendmicro.com. Please head our website to get our PGP key. Just if you have questions, like are you interested in stuff? Are you interested in bugs in this type of router or whatever? The worst we're going to say is no thank you, but come back with something else. So that's it. I love bug bounty programs. I've been on the receiving end of them. It's a lot cooler to be on the purchasing end of them. So they affect all of us every day in many ways, but let's use them wisely. So any other questions for me? Question?
I would think, and just asking your opinion, you would want to have a fairly mature, whether you sell software or not, a fairly mature QA security testing process before you go try to jump into that.
You would think, yes. To his point is like you would think you would want a very mature response and QA process before you jump into a bug bounty program. Yes, you should have a mature secure response process before you do that. I've seen vendors who haven't. I'm not going to shame them because they've improved so much. Foxit, from when we first started reporting vulnerabilities to where they are now, has improved exponentially in their response process. So a lot of times it's kind of whether or not you want to mature, guess what? It's time to get big. But yes, if you're going to start your own bug bounty program, the worst thing you can do is assume you're not going to get bugs. Because if you offer people cash for bugs, somebody's going to take you up on it. And then you better have some lawyers to make sure that it's all on the up and up. There was another question back here? Yes. Is that me? I don't know. I can't see it from back here.
Can you hack an iPhone?
Personally? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We have mobile phone to own that we handle in Tokyo, and there were exploits for Safari on the iPhone. The scary one was the broadband exploits. There were two that really worried me. One was a Wi-Fi exploit where you join a Wi-Fi station and you're exploited. Boom. They installed a rogue application that existed through a reboot. The second one is broadband. So there was a rogue broadband station and we paid a lot of money for that. Really cool bug. So yeah, you can absolutely hack iPhones. Question?
The state of Georgia is about to pass, it's on the governor's desk, it's called Senate Bill 315.
I've read it, yes.
Yes. Given that 94% of in 2000 do not even have a means to contact the published to report a hole. What is the likelihood that litigation, from the standpoint of this, a state level law with long arm statute,
Right.
is an invitation to litigation the moment a bug is reported,
Mm-hmm.
rather than working the process at all. So how? I mean, I just wrote the governor to veto it.
Yes.
He will. But like, you mentioned Wassenaar, but to me, one or two more states following suit is
Yeah.
going to really change this landscape for the worse.
The political landscape and the legislative landscape, when it comes to security research, are really a touchy subject right now for a lot of people. And it's a touchy subject internationally. If you go to cyberscoop.com, I think, they published a big article about why there were no Chinese people at Pondome this year. And that's an absolute direct result of proposed litigation in China. The bill in Georgia is very interesting because it's also written in a very unclear way about what's going to happen to security researchers who are doing legitimate research and trying to go through that white market avenue to get awarded, get compensated for their research as well. I think...
I actually have firsthand knowledge about that debate process.
Yeah?
I was testifying. It is built on the view that security research that is not directly contracted by the target
Right.
is illegitimate all the time.
Oof.
That is
But...
the view of the legislators. Now, the words don't quite say that.
Yeah.
But that is what's kind of going through the minds as this is crafted.
And that's where it gets dangerous. And the response that I've heard is, we've made it very public that we buy bugs in Adobe Reader. Does that mean that we've said that? Does that cover it? I don't know the answer. Yeah. I'm not a lawyer. Thankfully, I'm not, because I have children that I don't eat. So it's a lawyer joke. Sorry. Any lawyers in the room? Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Yeah, it's tough, and it's one of those areas where we're very concerned. We're watching it very closely as well, and it's one of those areas where I'm glad that we have lawyers, and I'm glad we're an international company, so we can at least leverage that. Please do. Anything else? I know I've got about like 30 seconds, but I'd love to answer more.
Do you think that the bug bounty program creates problems for companies that they do more for bugs than they do for developers, and they need developers to create bugs?
That's an interesting question. So, for those who might not have heard it, does the bug bounty, and please make sure I understand it, do bug bounty programs cause problems with companies if they end up paying more for bugs through a bounty program than they would developers? I say that if you are doing that, then you are running your bug bounty program very inefficiently. Because you should be paying your developers, because it's going to be a lot cheaper to pay developers than it is to run a bug bounty program. Without the developers, there's going to be too many bugs, and you're going to go broke on your bug bounty program. I would like to think that everything works together. It's one of those OODA loops, observe, orient, decide, act things where it's like, yes, we have to be able to respond, because as long as humans are writing code, humans are writing problematic code. So bad code's going to be out there. I would say if you don't have a good secure development lifecycle, if you don't have a good development thing, if you don't have that QA, if you don't have a response process, you don't need to be doing a bug bounty program. You will go broke doing it. So that's my response to that. And then let the vendor agnostic ones handle buying those bugs, and we'll take care of it, and you spend your money on developers instead. So hopefully that answers your question. I think I'm out of time, but I'm really thankful you guys stuck around. I've got stickers up here, a big Z on them for ZDI. I don't have, we just got our bug. Because we buy bugs. Get it? Because it's cute. It's adorable. I love my little scarab. But I don't have those stickers, but I have some Z stickers up here if you'd like. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you for BSides Nashville for having me.